We're back. We start the first session of today, inshallah, with Brother Mohammad Hijab, discussing relationships and how they define us.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I do want to make this more of an interactive session, but I will speak a little bit about this topic because it has become quite a contemporary topic, especially when people speak about loneliness. I think in this country there was a lonely minister or something like that. They had, and in the West increasingly there is this issue of loneliness. One of my friends who went to Japan told me that there are companies now in Japan who you can rent a friend. You can have a friend for the weekend or something like that. And that shows you the extent to which this is obviously an issue. But it's very interesting that classically and philosophically, there are three concepts that are very closely related, and in many ways actually the same activity, but it's been labeled in a different way. So you have the word loneliness, and then you have the word alienation. Because alienation, you don't necessarily have to be away from people. Okay, you can be around a lot of people, but then because of who you are, what you believe, you could be alienated in that environment. And then you have another word, which is solitude. Now it's very interesting. Solitude has positive connotations, actually. Say I was meditating in solitude, because there's an aspect of choice that's connected to solitude. Like I went and done a meditation, and it was me in a state of solitude. So it has a positive connotation. But in reality, though, all those three things are similar, are connected. You can, for example, be by yourself and be lonely. You can be by yourself and be in a state of solitude. So there are two things that make A or B happen. Number one is choice, as we've mentioned, if you choose to do it. And number two, or B, you could say, is framing, how you frame the situation. So for example, us as Muslims, we have a great advantage because we believe in Allah. It's no coincidence that loneliness is on an uphill trajectory at the same time as atheism is. Because atheism is a proposition that God doesn't exist. And if you don't believe God is there, then clearly you're going to be lonely, isn't it? Because there's no one there to help you. There's no one there to speak to you. There's no one there to be with you. So the concepts in Islam of ma'iyya, al-ma'iyya al-ilahiyya, I'm not talking here in this, wahdat al-wujud sense or this polytheistic sense. We're talking about ma'iyya is that Allah is with you. This is the idea of huwa ma'akum. Aynama kuntum, as the Quran says, that He's with you wherever you were. This idea itself is enough to curb or limit the effects of loneliness. Because isn't it interesting that you can always know that there's going to be someone, not just someone, but the greatest one of all with you. So a pure loneliness cannot affect you in the same way as it affects a Japanese atheist or a Swedish atheist who is likely to commit suicide if it gets too bad, actually. So al-ma'iyya al-ilahiyya is this idea that Allah is with you. And He's not just with you, He is watching over you. That He sees what you do. That every action that you perform is something Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sees. Everything that you think, Allah knows it. He knows what's inside and outside. He knows what's intrinsic. He knows what's extrinsic. He knows what would have been. He knows what is. He knows what will be. So when there's this ihata, there's this encompassing, that Allah is there, but they're at the highest level, the highest logical possible level. He's with you. And not only is He with you, that there is this level of magisterial hudur that you have. Like for example now, the prayer, if you understand these concepts of ma'iyah, and the fact that Allah is watching you and that He is with you, your prayer will become absolutely transformed, actually. Because imagine it, when we pray, sometimes because we've done it for so long, it becomes like a robotic exercise. We just go through the motions. We do wudu, and we just pray. But just this thought process that every time you pray, right before you pray, you think, okay, Allah is watching me and Allah is with me. Those two things. That transforms the whole experience, actually. If you think about it, right? Right before you're about to pray, okay, whatever you're going to do now, Allah is with me and He's watching me. If Allah is with you, how can you be lonely? You see, like it's a very deep connection. And now comes the second level of this connection, which is speaking to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, some scholars call this munajah and others call it, there is this kind of discussion that you can have with Allah. You can speak to Allah, you can make dua to Allah. That's a serious connection that you have with Allah. You can ask Him whatever you want. You see, one of the things that we need, human beings, because we're social creatures, we need to have communication with other people, right? Why? So you can air out your grievances, you can discuss your problems, etc. But then when you realize that, okay, you have Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that is, He disposes all the affairs. He is in control over every atom. That there is no better entity to complain to than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it gives you an outlet for complaining. In the Catholic tradition, they try, for example, in the context of sins, they have the confession box. You have a person who doesn't know who you are and therefore doesn't really care, because if you don't know someone, how are you going to care for them as much? And giving you this kind of like prescriptions, Hail Mary, this and that, do this and that. I killed such and such a person, I slept with such and such a person, just do this and do that, get out of here. This is not a solution to the problem of humanity. Whereas, if you direct your complaints to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, like Yaqub mentions in the Quran, إِنَّمَا أَشْكُو بَثِّي وَحُزْنِي إِلَى اللَّهِ, that certainly I complain, ashku, I complain of my sadness and my sorrow to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Like the deepest and most painful human emotions, grief and sorrow, that Yaqub alayhi salam has decided to complain to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We obviously in these retreats, we always talk about, what is a strong man and all these kind of things. The truth of the matter is, وَخُلِقَ الْإِنسَانُ ضَعِيفًا, we're all weak. And the greatest part of strength is to realize your own weaknesses. And the human being is fundamentally weak from every single perspective. Psychologically weak, physically weak, spiritually weak. In every single sector, we're actually very insignificant and weak. When you look at, if we zoom out of the planet Earth and look at just the planet itself and how big the planet is compared to us, we're very weak. And so when you rely upon the strong one, the all strong, the one who created the heavens and the earth, if we have just this aspect in place, it creates a strong person, which is why we say la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah, that there is no strength and power except for with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So one of the key solutions to loneliness and alienation is a meaningful connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The most important aspect of this connection, so we spoke about ma'iyah, we spoke about the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is with you and that He can see you and that He can hear you. And we also spoke about complaining to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and making dua to Allah, asking Him for anything you want. But there's another layer of this, which is loving Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is the highest level actually of all. If you were to ask a question, what is the most powerful emotion? What is the most powerful emotion? Maybe I've just set it up here. I was going to ask you, but I think you're going to know what I'm going to say now because I've set it up in a particular way. What's the most powerful emotion known to human beings? Okay, well, yeah, I just set out for you, right? This is if it was a triangle, I'd be in trouble with the same color. But think about it, right? Let's do a thought experiment for a second. Right? Let's do a thought experiment. Some of the most powerful experiences that you're going to have as young men is sexual experiences. You know, everyone's smiling now, everyone's okay, everyone's awake. No, but let's just sort of say, you know, let's do a thought experiment, okay? Let's imagine we all have phones. Sometimes I'm on Twitter and I flick through, just like you. I flick through Twitter, and Elon Musk has put a situation where you can see stuff about something that can trigger you. I'm sure everyone here has been through this experience, and whoever says they haven't is a liar. Okay? And so you have an option to continue watching this thing, which is a very, let's call it, attractive option. Yeah? Or you can move on. Now, us married men maybe have an advantage. Say, okay, you know what? I saw what I saw, I'm going to move on. This guy started filming me right straight away. This guy started filming me straight away now. We can say, okay, I saw what I saw. Okay, you know, tonight we'll sort this matter or something, right? I'll delay it for, sorry to say, yeah, that's how we think. The weaker married men will think, no, let me just watch it anyway. Doesn't matter, you know. But let's just say for the sake of argument. You can have an option to watch it. Now, let's say the devil wins this round and you see something very attractive and you're flicking through social media. And let's just do a thought experiment, which I'm sure everyone will relate to. You want to watch a little bit more, okay? And let's say you do, sorry to say. Let's say you fall into the trap and you start watching a little bit more. And you see yourself getting more and more, sorry to say, aroused. It gets worse and worse. Now imagine that's happening. Maybe you shouldn't imagine about it too much. It's not this kind of retreat. And then someone bursts through the door. Okay? So let's say you're in a hotel here. And someone bursts through the door. And it's none other than Mohammad Hijab himself, and I'm joking. Someone bursts through the door, and it turns out to be one of those Essex guys, or what are they from? Norfolk, right-wing guys that are around this area, because when I came here, I saw all these kind of tattooed, right-wing, white working-class men. And he's got a gun. It's probably a pellet gun, knowing the socio-economic status. But let's just say or they come in with a knife. Let's be honest, how are you going to feel? Okay, maybe let's get a more formidable opponent. A scary person comes in with a gun and you're watching this. How are you going to feel? You're going to feel scared. Okay, let me ask you a question. Which of the two emotions is going to be more powerful? Is it going to be your sexual desire or is it going to be the fear? The fear, isn't it? And I promise you, the fear will overtake your sexual desire in a second, 1 second. All it takes is 1 second. The moment you see a gun or a knife, that's it. You no longer have any sexual desire for anything. You've forgotten about what that woman looks like. You've forgotten about it. So fear is more powerful than what? It's more powerful than sexual desire. So you could say, okay, well, then that makes fear the most powerful desire, right? Fear is actually even more powerful than anger, if you think about it. Let me give you a scenario. Let's say you're walking in the streets, yeah? And one of those guys outside barges you. You say, why are you barging me? And you start getting angry, right? Is that how you're going to feel? You're going to feel a bit angry? Let's say you're walking with your wife and she says something about your wife. Or you're walking with your daughter or sister or whoever it may be. And they say something derogatory or pejorative to your daughter or your sister. How are you going to feel? Angry, you're going to feel angry, right? Now, same person who's doing this brings out a gun and points it right at your head. What feeling are you going to have now? You're going to feel, let's say he points at your sister as well. Of course you're going to feel, unless you're psychopathic, you have to feel fear here. If you don't, you've got an ailment of a psychological nature. So fear can overtake sexual desire, and fear can overtake what else? Anger. So fear seems to be the champion. But let me give you another thought experiment. Let's imagine now you have a child or a wife or a sister or a mother. Everyone here has had a mother at least at one point, okay? Otherwise you wouldn't be here. And let's say that same person points a gun at your mother's head. And let's say this person was acting in a very rambunctious manner, and you know that they're trying to come to your mother, or you're trying to attack your mother, and you know that by being involved in that, you might be killed. But would you be involved in that? Yes, you would be. Why is it really, fundamentally? Because something your mother. What do you feel about your mother? Because you love your mother. So it seems to me we have a new champion. And the champion is love. Do you see the point here? So fear can overtake sexual desire, fear can overtake anger. But only love can overtake fear. Really and truly. Which means that of the emotions in the human experience, that human beings, most intense emotions that human beings feel, there is nothing more powerful than love. This is a long way of saying what I could have just said it like that, but I wanted you to really get a sense of what I'm saying. And that's why Allah says, وَمِنَ النَّاسِ مَن يَتَّخِذْ مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ أَنْدَادًا يُحِبُّونَهُمْ كَحُبِّ اللَّهِ وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا أَشَدُّ حُبًّا لِلَّهِ. There are some of them that take other than God as objects of love. That they love them as they should love Allah. They love them as they should love Allah. And those who truly believe have more love for Allah. Because if your love for Allah is more than anyone else, what that will do is it will make you act in a principled manner more than any other emotion can. And this is something we unfortunately maybe don't emphasize as much. We don't talk about love. But then how can you love Allah if you don't know how to love the creation? If you're not a loving person, if you're a cold person, if you don't love your children, if you don't love your wives, well, if you don't love your parents, if you don't know how to, you don't even know how to, you don't know how to show affection. Like that man who came and he said, I don't show affection to my children. And the Prophet ﷺ, what did he do? He reprimanded him. So what do I do with a man who Allah has taken rahmah away from his heart? So this is an aspect of relationships that if you don't get right, I'm sorry to say, nothing else can go right. It's actually the most important thing. The most important thing for a man, for a woman, and for a child is to learn and to know how to love. A, how to love Allah. B, how to love the family members. And C, how to love yourself actually as well. And everyone loves themselves. In fact, Imam al-Ghazali has a book on love in Ihya al-Ulumuddin. He's got one of the, and it's actually been translated if you're interested. And he says every human being, very interesting because the way he puts it is almost like modern language. Very interesting. He goes, every human being essentially loves themselves. In psychology, they call this ethical egoism. They call this psychological egoism. Ethical egoism is when you think that your love should be over everyone else's love. Psychological egoism is where you believe that, okay, everyone essentially does things for their own sake. There was an episode of a sitcom called Friends. Now, I used to watch this one. I'm not advocating. I know I've just made a series myself. So you're going to say this man has slipped off and fallen off. No, there was an interesting episode. And whoever wrote it clearly had psychological or philosophical training. There's a character called Joey. I'm sure all of you know who he is anyway. Or many of you do. This is a character called Joey, yes? And this guy, he was saying there's no such thing as a selfless good deed. I don't know if any of you have watched this episode, but I watched it maybe when I was 12 years old, but I still remember it. There's no such thing as a selfless good deed. So everything you do is essentially for yourself. That's what he was saying. And then, Phoebe, who is the other character in the thing, was throughout the episode trying to show him examples of such a thing as a selfless good deed. And he would always rubbish the example and show that's not the case, yeah? Now what played out in that episode is exactly, by the way, a discussion that psychologists had. Some psychologists say everything you do is essentially for your own sake. Someone will say, oh, that's not true. And the other school is called the psychological altruists. Yeah, that's the other school. And they say it's not. You can have an altruistic belief, which is, altruism is when you do something for other people's favor. Okay? And egoism, psychological egoism, is when everything goes back to you. So some people give examples. They say, look, what about a woman? We just gave the example, right? Who puts herself in harm's way for her own child. Clearly that's altruism. Huh? What about a man who throws himself on a grenade to save himself in order to rescue or to get victory for the entire army? These are examples, thought experiment type examples that the altruistic school uses against the psychological egoists. Psychological egoists respond and they say the following. They say, okay, let's look at your examples. The woman who puts herself in harm's way because she wants to save her child, she's essentially doing that because she cannot live with herself if she didn't do that. The pain of living with herself would be so high that she would not be able to tolerate that pain. Therefore, it's actually a selfish reason as well. That's what they respond. And the man who throws himself on the grenade, he's doing it because he's considering the legacy that he'll leave when he does so. Now, I'll be honest, and I'm not giving you an answer here. There's two schools of thought in psychology on this matter, the psychological egoists and the altruists. The majority opinion, the majority of scholars actually are on the view of the psychological egoists. They believe every human being is essentially selfish. Definitely those evolutionary biologists believe in that. I mean, definitely Darwin and all this, Dawkins, and he wrote The Selfish Gene, and they give biological justification. But that's something else. I'm saying that in psychology, that is the dominant school. Al-Ghazali seems to accept this, by the way, which I find very fascinating. He says human beings are essentially selfish. It's very powerful. That's why I'm telling you this man was really ahead of his time. He's saying, and the ones that we love are those who, this is what he says. He says, the ones that we love are the ones who give us most favor in our lives. And by the way, he does not rubbish that idea. He doesn't say that's a very bad thing and you shouldn't be like that and whatever. He's accepting this. But then he extends the principle and he says, well, who gives you most favor? If this is the logical idea of love, if the one that you love is the one who gives you the most benefit, then there's nothing that gives you more benefit than Allah. He's saying, even if you're selfish as you are, as a human being, this is Ghazali's point. He said, even if you're selfish as you are as a human being, your selfishness would indicate that whoever gives you the most benefit is the one you should love the most. And there's no one that gives you more benefit than Allah. So even there's logical justification for loving Allah the most. And therefore, one way to love Allah more is to be grateful for Allah. وَإِن تَعُدُّوا نِعْمَةَ اللَّهِ لَا تُحْصُوهَا. If you count the blessings of Allah, you will not be able to enumerate them. وَآتَاكُمْ مِنْ كُلِّ مَا سَأَلْتُمُوهُ وَإِن تَعُدُّوا نِعْمَةَ. He gave you everything that you wanted. وَلَئِن شَكَرْتُمْ لَأَزِيدَنَّكُمْ وَلَئِن كَفَرْتُمْ إِنَّ عَذَابِي لَشَدِيدٌ. That if you thank Allah, Allah will give you more. So this idea of actually enumerating the blessings of Allah, Allah's given me this, Allah's given me that. If you do that on a daily basis, you will love Allah more because you will remember the benefits that are incurred to you by Allah. And this is the heart of a beautiful relationship that you can have with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if you want to extend that, then you have to start thanking the people as well, because man lam yashkur an-nas lam yashkur Allah. Whoever does not thank the people does not thank Allah. It's hadith of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Whoever does not thank the people does not thank Allah. So the relationship that we should be working on is the love relationship. It's the most critical one. It's the most critical one. It's the best thing. I mean, that's why some of the scholars of old, they even when they're defining ibadah, they define it in that term. Like Ibn al-Qayyim al-Jawziyya mentioned, for example. He says, what is ibadah? He says, qimmatul, what do you call it? Hubb and qimmatul khudu', the epitome and the apex of love with Allah. That's how some scholars of the past actually even defined what ibadah is in the first place. To have the highest level of love and the highest level of submission to Allah. But love is part of it. We focus on the submission part a lot, but why don't we focus on the love part? It's actually the most colorful part of it. It's the most exciting. It's the most interesting part of it. Because when you fill your heart with the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this way, other actors cannot manipulate you. In the world we live in now, actors can manipulate an individual. But if your heart is filled with the love of Allah, then you are muktafi. You are self-sufficient with the love of Allah. Okay, I've spoken enough. Let's open it up for discussion. Sheikh, tafadhal.
It is not a discussion.
Yes.
I want to say that that's related to your introduction.
Yeah.
In Arabic, you know that Arabic language is very rich in expressions. Very rich.
Sheikh, do you want the...
Allah Azza wa Jal.
تفضل. Yeah.
أنا بوصل لك.
لا خلاص أنا جيت.
أنا أستريح.
Arabic language is one of the most, not one, it is the most rich language in expressions. And Allah, between all the expressions to discuss or to explain the relation between Him and us, He used love. قل إن كنتم تحبون الله فاتبعوني يحببكم الله, because love is at the top. According to the schools of philosophy, at the end of the day, they start, their platform is what we call the practice, their own practice. They study, let us say, 10,000, 100,000 cases, and then they conclude the formula of the conclusion of the idea. But according to us, actually, still up to now, we believe in love. All Muslims, Salafis, Sufis, whatever it is, love actually is the direction of us towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If we don't love Him, we can't obey Him. Because to be honest, if you think about what we practice daily, who have this ability of routine to wash himself daily 5 times and to pray 5 times? I mean, even it's distinguished in the view of others when they talk about Muslims. Sometimes they are surprised. They are surprised why our children in the school, they don't eat or drink during Ramadan. Nobody was that. No parents, and the law is in their side, the school is in their side, but still, they don't eat or drink because they believe that it is something they have to do from their own as a love. Thanks. I'm sorry.
No, thank you very much. That's we all benefited from that. Does anyone else have any contributions or shall I? Yes, tafadhal. Yeah.
When you covered it beautiful, I can tell you I think that you're in a nice way. But we don't live in a Muslim society. We live in a Christian society, so-called Christian society, an atheist society. And loneliness is part of society. What I mean by that is started not long ago, like philosophers like Nietzsche, but they said that God is dead. God no longer exists, and you are literally fighting the battle of your life. What you're doing day to day is a battle. If there is no happiness to it, loneliness is on the day you're born. Now that's evolved into 21st century today, with people like Jordan Peterson, who preach in a way as you should follow your selfish desires. And now you can see that in the society we live in, where there's alcohol abuse, there's drug abuse, the number of suicides are going up, the number of child pregnancies are going up. How do you create a positive Muslim image in a society like that? When it's ingrained in the society. They don't know the Christian, they don't believe in chanting, they believe in themselves. They're the superpower.
Mhm.
They are the greater good.
Mhm.
They themselves are the greater good. They are even superior.
Mhm.
So how would they respect your views? And how could you spread your love to them?
Well, I mean, look, you mentioned a few points there. You're right to point out the role of, there's a guy called Friedrich Nietzsche. He's like 19th century philosopher. Yeah, he's 1900, so it'd be something like that, 1900, 19th century. And he famously said God is dead. Now, some classified him as a nihilist. And this idea of nihilism this is what we're up against in many ways, because nihilism is this idea there's no meaning. There's no meaning in life. You're living a meaningless existence. Now, if you think about that for a second, put yourself in their shoes. Think about what kind of outcomes would happen in your life. Think about there's no meaning. You're just a collection of atoms. You're a collection of atoms, you're carbon. That's what you are. Death means nothing, life means nothing. You are just a speck on a rock in the universe. That's a very depressing thought. And it's rightfully so. A lot of people that believe in this stuff become depressed. If I believed in that, I would be very depressed. I wouldn't know how to manage, actually. So atheism and meaninglessness, all that kind of stuff, I think it's a necessary concomitant to depression. Jordan Peterson wrote one of his first books I've ever written is called Maps of Meaning, actually. He recognizes full well, that you have to have meaning in order to have... I spoke to him about it, actually, and he recognized it. But look at his life. Look at him now. I mean, he's a person who's lecturing in Harvard, who's only a few people in the world have as much psychological information as he does. Jordan Peterson. Put your hand up if you don't know who he is. All right, put your hand up if you do know who he is. Yeah. So Jordan Peterson is a person, because now he's become quite famous online, that's why. The issue is, bro, like, people like him don't have I told him this. If you look at the video that I had with him, that, by the way, has the most views on his channel from any video that he's ever done with any person. Very surprising. He's got 7.1 million views. That's the most viewed podcast he's ever done with anybody, even Joe Rogan or anybody. I found it quite interesting to know that. Why? I think because people realized, that the champ is... No, but there was a part of it when I said to him, listen, the Quran says, وَمَنْ أَعْرَضَ عَنْ ذِكْرِي فَإِنَّ لَهُ مَعِيشَةً ضَنْكًا. Whoever goes away from my remembrance, he's going to have a depressed life. And on the flip side, the Quran says, أَلَا بِذِكْرِ اللَّهِ تَطْمَئِنُّ الْقُلُوبِ. That certainly with the remembrance of God, hearts find rest. And I explained that to him, and if you watch it again, he says, yes, I understand that from a psychological perspective. And he done this thing that he does with his hand, and he goes, because by believing in one God, your attention is not multiplicitous, meaning your heart is not attached to so many different places, it's only attached to one. He goes, and that when your heart is attached to only one thing, obviously I'm paraphrasing what he means here, when your heart is only attached to one thing, then you're more likely to be less anxious. So he understands it from a psychological perspective. There's even, wallahi, I had a private conversation with him as well. And there's even a study that was in 2019 that was done at the university, one of the universities in Germany, okay? And it's about human satisfaction and quality of life. And this is the only study that I've ever come across that mentions religious groups. And this study said that of all of the different groups that exist, the ones who have the highest quality of life are Muslims. And they actually mentioned the word Muslims by name. And this is not a Muslim study. The person who conducted it was a woman called, I don't know, something, Laura Tobin, or you can find this online. I actually had to download it because it's like behind a paywall. But nevertheless, the theory is there. We Muslims might be lagging behind in every other field, frankly. In the last 100 years, technologically, we're not where we used to be. Scientifically, we're not where we used to be. Militarily, we can be, but we're not united, In all these fields, we're not doing the best. But when it comes to meaning and purpose and morally, actually, we're always number one. And we always have the thing that if they had, wallahi, you would imagine what they would do with it. Carl Jung, who's a psychologist as well, he said that the West are technological giants and moral dwarfs. They're technological giants and moral dwarfs. And so what we need to do, our relationship with the West is, we can copy them in the thing they're good at. Okay, if you want to learn how to do science well, you have to go through the West now. I know it's a sad thing to admit, but you have to kind of look at what they've done. If you want to do things technologically, you have to go through them. But morally, we will never take guidance from them because we've always had what they wish they had. So that's what I would say about that. Okay. Any other comments or questions or anything? Yeah. Salam, bro.
First of all, thank you for the talk. I think there's a lot we can all take away from it.
Yeah.
Just wanted to ask you said there were two schools of thought regarding the psychologists.
Mm.
First of all, did you say there's two schools of thought within psychology or among Muslims as well on the topic?
No, psychologists. Yeah.
So my question is, I guess, with that, one being the people who do everything selflessly, and one being for the greater good, one being everything's for their self-interest.
Yeah.
So my question is, does it not? I mean, humans by nature, if you look at kids, we've got two young ones that, by nature selfish.
Yeah.
That's how you're born. But as you grow up, then it kind of depends on the individual. So one can be doing their own selfish reasons, even if it's for legacy or whatever.
Yeah.
At the same time, you might have some people who do it for the greater good or just purely because they have that love for Allah in their heart. So would you, I'd say personally that would be dependent on the person's intention. I was wondering what your personal opinion is.
Yeah, I think that I kind of agree with the egoist a little bit. So I think that everything essentially goes back to yourself, essentially does. But it can be done in a crude way, like for example, what you mentioned. If you say, well, I do things for my kids, once again, the argument's very powerful on the other side. So that people will say, okay, you're doing it for your kids because you love your kids and you derive a pleasure that comes from loving your kids. So it's very difficult to say anything you do is completely selfless. I just think it's very, very difficult to say that. That's not, Al-Ghazali mentions, and I agree, it's not something which is shameful. It's not shameful. It's the way you express that can be shameful. Do you know what I mean? Like, everyone is essentially, they have an element of selfishness inside of them. And this, by the way, if you look at the Quran, it seems to indicate this. يَوْمَ يَفِرُّ الْمَرْءُ مِنْ أَخِيهِ. Like, when the stakes are higher, people become more selfish. In the day of judgment, people will be running away from their own family members. يَوَدُّ أَحَدُهُمْ لَوْ يَفْتَدِي مِنْ عَذَابِ يَوْمِئِذٍ بِبَنِيهِ, for example, that he would ransom his own child for the punishment, against the punishment. So it seems to me when the stakes are higher, people become more selfish. That's how Allah created. That's my belief of how Allah created us. The one who is most kareem, or the one who is most mukarram or dignified, is the one who doesn't show it as much, or the one who resists that urge as much. That's what I think. There's always going to be that element of selfishness, but that's what you have to fight against. It doesn't mean that's how it should be. That's how it is, but it's not how it should be. That's why I said this. Psychological egoism is different to what you call ethical egoism. Because ethical egoism, someone called Ayn Rand, it's a woman actually, she's still online, she was like the forerunner of this school of thought. She said, no, you're selfish by nature and you should be selfish by nature. You see the difference? She's saying you should be. Do anything that's in your interest, full stop. She was a leader of a school of thought called ethical egoism. We don't believe in that school. We thought that is actually the same as what Allah says in the Quran. أَفَرَأَيْتَ مَنِ اتَّخَذَ إِلَهُ هَوَاهُ. Have you seen the one who has taken his own self as a god? So there's a difference between what is and what should be. Yes, we all are selfish to some extent. It's actually healthy to recognize that. And then we try and curtail that. And so what's the highest way of worshiping Allah? There is an element, because if there wasn't, heaven and hell wouldn't exist. The highest way of worshiping Allah is to worship Allah because of who He is. To recognize that, okay, because Allah has these sifat, that He is most perfect in every single sifat. He is worthy of worship, that's why I'm worshiping Allah. Right below it is because I don't want to go to hell and I want to go to Jannah. But there's nothing wrong with saying, okay, I'm worshiping Allah to go to Jannah, for example. If you say that, it's quite selfish to say that, if you think about it. But it's not wrong, it's not madhmoom. Because Allah respects, He created you, He respects the fact that you're going to act in a selfish manner a little bit. Do you know what I mean? Some people take this to the extreme, and as I mentioned, Ayn Rand is one person, but also we're seeing it in the consequential or Machiavellian extreme, like people that usually quote 48 laws of power. So Robert Greene is a Machiavellianist, he's an instrumentalist. He's someone, it's all about the means for him. It's about getting your way, which has the assumption that everything is about you. It's not about other people. There's no honor in that. So it removes the honor element. If you're only acting strategically for your own interest all the time, that's a non-integrous way of living your life. That's how I would put it. But to try and delete the fact that you have your own interest, like, let me give you an easy example, right? If you're driving in the street, or you're walking in the street, I'm always giving you these examples of the street, for some reason the street, right? You're walking in the street, and let's say you saw somebody get slapped in the face, okay? Unprovokedly, unwarrantedly, there's no reason for it, that somebody got slapped. Okay, would you feel angry? Okay, maybe you'd feel angry on their behalf. Like sometimes we watch a video and we see that happening. Like recently, the Manchester thing where the guy booted the guy in the head. I'm not sure if you saw it, right? Okay, we get angry for that. Well, why is this guy doing this? This guy's in a position of powerlessness, etc. Okay, would you, honestly speaking, if that person had, this person, you don't know them, yeah? If that person had done that to someone you know, would you feel less or more angry? More angry if it was your own father, for example. Okay, so here we're learning something. Proximity influences your emotional reaction. The closer you are to the person, the more you're going to feel anger. Okay, if it was your own child, how would you feel? Way more angry, right? Scale of 1 to 10, maybe like 9 out of 10, 10 out of 10. If it was you now, someone slapping you, would you feel angry? Yes, they would. You would. So the closer things are to you, the more they affect you. There's nothing wrong with that. That's how Allah created you. Nothing wrong with that at all. But it's about how to manage that the issue is. So yeah, in terms of my own personal tarjih, well, I think, in terms of the psychological literature, I do believe that the egoists have the stronger arguments, but the altruists make good points, but they're never undercutters. They cannot undercut what the egoists say, but it doesn't mean that we should act like that.
Who do you think lives a more fulfilling life?
Yeah.
If you're doing it for other people, and that's like your ultimate aim, or if you're doing it for yourself, do you think that they'd have an equal level of satisfaction internally?
Yeah, so it's a very good question. I mean, the thing is, what we should be doing it is for the people, all right? Like the way that Quran mentions the hadith, if you look at all the literature, it seems to indicate a communal spirit, very clearly, right? The ones who are best, most beloved amongst you to Allah, ahabbukum anfa'akum linnas, or kama qala sallallahu, the ones who are most beneficial to the people, etc. The irony of the situation is this, with the ethical egoists, and this is my response to someone like Ayn Rand, yeah, who's the ethical egoist, is that when you act selfishly, you're ironically not acting in your own interest. So yeah, let me explain that again. So when you act in a selfish manner, in a zero-sum manner, so I win, you lose. When you act in that way, actually that's not in your interest because it's never reciprocated, A. B, there's consequential negatives of that. And C, we as a human being want to help other people. We have something else, fitri, we like to help other people. That's why people like to give charity, etc. So the idea of acting in a zero-sum way that affects somebody else in a negative and affects you in a positive, I don't think is a good thing to do. But as I say, you have to respect the fact that you have this selfish nafs. You do have a selfish nafs that you have to try and tame, basically, inside of you. You have a selfish nafs you have to tame. Every single one of us has a selfish nafs that we have to tame. And the way to tame it is to do good deeds to other people, etc., etc. That's what I think. Yes?
You say that it's acceptable in Islam to, I mean, I've heard this from some scholars, to compete to wanting to go to Jannah. Is that considered like, I don't know, selfish, but in an Islamic way because you want to go to Jannah?
Yeah.
Because from what I've heard, there's encouragement to compete for that.
Yeah, there is. I mean, there's in the Quran, وَفِي ذَلِكَ فَلْيَتَنَافَسِ الْمُتَنَافِسُونَ, like, you know, and the hadith of the Prophet, لَا حَسَدَ إِلَّا فِي اثْنَتَيْن, you know, there's no envy except for two things. One person that Allah's given him a lot of money, so he spends it, and the other one who's Quran, you know, the one who learns and teaches the Quran. So on these aspects, yeah, you should. But you've got to be careful of having jealousy, because jealousy is actually, look, let's think about this for a second, right? Love is a very positive emotion, but what comes with love is jealousy. It's almost a natural consequence of having love. Like, you have protective jealousy over the ones who you love, and you have jealous over the things that people have that you don't have. You're jealous over those things. And Islam has come to negate this thing of jealousy. It's actually a very negative thing in general. It's only allowed in very restricted context, as I've mentioned. But even then, you have to be very careful. Jealousy and hiqd and resentment destroy your mental state of mind. They actually have no benefit. Protective jealousy can have a benefit, and a little bit of jealousy, can have a benefit. But when it's going to a point where you want izalat and ni'mah, you want the other person's blessing to be removed, we've reached a critical mass now, which Islam considers to be negative. So you do have to, if you feel like jealous about what other people have, for example, then this is an indication that you are not happy with the qismah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You're not happy with Allah's proportionment of good things and stuff like that. So
I have a bit of a problem with this.
Yeah.
I have a bit of a problem with leaving the egoist argument where we left it.
yeah,
I think we can take it a step further.
okay.
Sheikh Ojeri, can you join us on the panel, please? I want you to join this egoist conversation. From there, like then from this side. So I understand it's a reality. But I don't understand, or I don't accept that we just leave it as it is. I think that there should be further guidance on how to tame it. And I recall over here a story from Umar ibn Khattab when he was told, and who do you love the most? And he said, I love myself. And then he went away, and then he said, no, your love for Allah needs to be greater. And he struggled at this point. And then he went away, and then he came back and said, no, now my love for Allah is greater than my love for myself.
Jesus, got microphone.
Hey. So would it be correct over here to say that accepting the reality that egoism is the reality is the first strength? However, leaving it where it is a weakness. And then accepting that you're making this egoism and you're transferring all of that, let's call it selfishness, rather from yourself, taking it towards your deen or towards your Lord. So, for example, yes, I want to earn, but for the sake of my deen. And yes, I want to be powerful, but for the sake of the deen. And yes, I want to look after my family, but because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He said so. Because Allah, like Allah uses this language of trade between Him and the believers. But for us, just to say that, no, in essence, everything that you do is selfish and you just leave it over there.
No. Yeah, exactly.
There has to be further guidance.
I think you're right. I think maybe we did leave it a little bit hanging there. And I think we need to make a very fine distinction between psychological egoism and ethical egoism. So psychological egoism is this idea that we have this nafs, which is very selfish, okay? And ethical egoism is that you should act on its impulses, basically. That you should do whatever your nafs, which is selfish, asks you to do, you should do it. Now, obviously, ethical egoism is a kind of kufr and shirk, really, because it's, in many ways, the basis of liberalism. In many ways, I mean, it's...
Follow your desire unconditionally.
Yeah, it's, in fact, in liberalism, they call it the hedonistic principle. They have their own formulation of it, yeah? We don't have this belief. We accept, okay, a human being can be very selfish, but he must act in these ways. Because to stop his selfishness from affecting other people, from hurting other people, and the selfishness is not completely bad, is the point, because Allah created us like that. But it's, if you act upon it, that becomes bad. It becomes madhmoom, it becomes actually unpraiseworthy, very, if you like, unvirtuous actions. And that's always been the case. Like, if you act in a selfish manner, in a way that hurts other people, but gratifies your own gain, it's always going to be negative. So I think that's a perfect example you gave of Umar ibn Khattab, because there's something refreshing about some Shi'i or other person would look at it and say, look, he's admitting that Umar ibn Khattab is admitting that he loves himself more. But this is a very astonishing level of self-reflection. He's admitting something which is, if you think about it, like, he thought about it. He wanted to be honest with himself. He said, who do I really love more? Maybe he was doing these thought experiments. Maybe he was thinking about it. And he thought, probably I love myself more than anyone else, when you consider it. And he had good reason to think that. Because Umar al-Khattab is, if you look at his seerah and his biography, he's one of the most self-reflective sahabis al-Itlaq. If you really think about it, he's so self-reflective. He's always accusing himself of nifaq. He's always doing this, that is what he does all the time. So he thought about it, and then he started working on himself. Now, between the first and the second stage, something happened, something took place, where he then said, no, now I love Allah and the Messenger. So whatever he done, this is a kind of tazkiyatun nafs that he done there. Whatever he done is what we need to do. Where he diagnosed his own issue, because the thing is, he knew that's not something the Prophet ﷺ wanted to hear. The Prophet ﷺ asked him a question, he gave him the answer, he knew he wouldn't want to hear it, but he just wanted to be honest. So he gave him an honest answer rather than the expedient answer. And then he worked on whatever he had to work on. Something happened in that interim, and he came back and said, now I've worked on myself, and now... But if we're being honest, if Umar al-Khattab, he started with this realization that actually I'm acting in a very selfish way, and I need to work on myself before I can even say that I love Allah and the Messenger more than myself, then let's be honest, if that was his initial state, what do you think our initial state is? If we're being totally honest about it. So there's a level of self-reflection and self-accountability that we have to have with ourselves and say, are we acting selfishly? Do we really love Allah the way that we claim to love Allah? Do we love the Messenger the way that we claim to love the Messenger? Do we act like we love the Messenger the way we claim to love him? Because someone who acts like he loves someone, he wants to know everything about him. He wants to be with him. But we can't be with the Prophet ﷺ, but we can do everything that's close to that. Are we acting like that? So we have to work on ourselves is the point. And I think you're right. That's a very good example of Umar al-Khattab realizing it and then coming to that subsequent realization.
Have we answered your question, brother? I just remembered that. You see the question that you asked, there's two elements to it. And I just wanted to dig deeper, and I think we'll end with this point. Are you speaking about it from the struggle that a Muslim has it living in the West and seeing that there's a clash between the way that we do things and the way they do things? And how do we internalize that and make ourselves comfortable internally with it? Or are we speaking about it from a dawah perspective on how do we show them that our point is superior to theirs?
Because we worship Allah, we love Allah, right? There's no reason why we're all the other reason to it. There's a selfish reason to it as well. Because we want to, there's a greater good to it, right? By doing that. And that's the selfish reason to it. How do we show that on the outside? How do we show that to others? We're doing that for ourselves. How can we show that in a positive light? Now, when I mention these people, they do it in a way as to motivate others. We don't do it to motivate others. We do it from a spiritual point of view. So how does those two come together? How do we create a positive image that overtakes theirs? And that's what I understand.
The fact that they're depressed and we're not.
Correct, yeah. In the simplest terms, in layman's terms, yeah, 100% right.
Every 1 in 3 of them have considered suicide.
Yeah,
which is, does it come down to faith and belief? What do you think of that?
I mean, it's very difficult to try and convince the people who've got more money than you, pound for pound, and who are more technologically advanced, that they're wrong and we're right. That's the truth. And that's always been a psychological reality, and one that the Quran even mentions, you know, the إِلَّا قَالَ مُتْرَفُوهَا, you know, I forget the ayah now, it's إِنَّ وَجَدْنَا أَبَأَنَا عَلَى أُمَّةٍ وَإِنَّا عَلَى آثَارِهِمْ لَمُقْتَدُونَ. That the mutrafun say, the mutrafun, the ones who are, you know, higher echelons of society. And this was clearly the case with Quraysh. We saw that they, like for example, لو كان خيرا ما سبقونا إليه, what the Bani Israel said. If it was good, if this Islam was good, they would not have gone to it before we have. The mentality is we have always innovated technologically and scientifically. We are number one. So if there's anything good at this level, how is it the case that these guys have reached it before we have? These backward guys that have less money than us and living in developing countries. How could they, you know, reached this level before we reached it on such a fundamental question. That's what, you know, and subhanAllah, there's an ayah in the Quran where Allah says, يعني, رَبَّنَا لَا تَجْعَلْنَا فِتْنَةً لِلَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا. Do not make us a fitna for the ones who disbelieve. Ibn Kathir mentions about this ayah, he says that by making us lose in battle. Because when we lose in battle militarily, when we lose militarily, the disbelievers consider that they're on the truth, because how can the truth lose? That's how they do it. So it's an uphill struggle psychologically of a people that, let's say for the sake of argument, have less money than you do, or to believe them over yourself. But as I mentioned, you have to, the argument is to show that that's a logical fallacy. It doesn't mean the more rich you are, the more right you are. There's nothing to show that. So you have to present the truth. If people are truly in the quest for the truth, they wouldn't care where it comes from. So sincerity overrides that. But a lot of people are not sincere.
And this leads to a very much wider conversation that we must be having, which is ridding ourselves from this inferiority complex as Muslims living in the West, and having gone through the Muslim barriers and forgetting all the Muslim videos. And I think that in itself needs to be a session that we can either have later on today or tomorrow, inshallah. And that would be a much wider conversation. Tafadhal.
So
Last question, and then khalas, we need to go to the free session because we've been here for a bit long.
So let's say if somebody throughout that whole day, every single action they do, they make an intention to please Allah. Before they go to work, their intention is to earn a halal income for the sake of Allah, to protect them from family. Before they go to the gym, they're doing it for the sake of Allah, to look after their health. So every single action is for the sake of Allah. Like you said about the level, the first one is just doing for Allah, second one is about for Jannah and Jahannam. If someone's at that stage and at that level, is that selfish or is that selfless? So should we accept that person? Should that person accept that what they're doing is essentially selfish to do for Allah? Or is that genuine?
So look, if you, on a technical level, very technically, if we're talking about the wording used, if I say I want to worship Allah because I want to go to Jannah, that's a selfish gain. It's a selfish reasoning. However, it's not madhmoom. It's not dispraiseworthy. It's not unpraiseworthy. You see. So the question is not whether something is selfish or not. It's whether it's the right kind of selfish or not. Okay. Now, obviously, the higher level of doing it. So yeah, if you want to go to Jannah, that's okay, and you want to have fun and enjoy yourself and the whole line and all these kind of things. Now, that's one thing. If the higher level of doing it is, you've mentioned, it's called ihtisab. It's called ihtisab. When you start thinking, I'm going to do this for the sake of Allah. Yeah. A better way of doing that even is to say, well, let's connect. What is the sifa of Allah that is in question? For example, if I'm going to do something that's relating to rizq, then you remember that Allah is al-Razzaq. So you connect your action with that one particular attribute of Allah, which is applicable in this case. If you're loving your child, so you're considering the love of Allah, you're doing it for the sake of Allah's love. That's the highest level that you can live as a human being, by the way.
But is that selfish or not?
There's probably an aspect of it which may be selfish, yeah, but it's not problematically selfish. Not, so who cares if it's selfish, you know? If, for example, if you're saying, oh, I'm doing it for the sake of Allah because it's something that brings me on a high level of this, it's about you at the end of the day. It's always going to be about you, right? There's no such thing as a complete ego death, you know? Some people call this called ego death, like where the case of I is demolished completely. There is no such thing as I. Unless you have a medical condition, because there was a time I was hallucinating. I tell you, I don't know, some of the brothers already heard the story from last time, you know the story. I'm not going to tell you what happened, I'm not going to tell the story. But I was taking some medical things, prescription drugs, prescription ones. And something happened, and all of a sudden, do you know when you put YouTube on 0.5? I'm not sure if you've ever done that, but everything started going so slow. Wallah. And then it's like closing your eyes, open your eyes, close your eyes, open your eyes, close your eyes, open your eyes. It's like I was coming in and out, weaving in and out of reality. And then afterwards, this is, my wife was there. She was observing this behavior. Yeah, started vomiting all over the place. So I remember that. Yeah. Then I started forgetting where I was. Okay, this was the first thing. And by the way, my wife recorded this, but I was wearing my underwear. If I had published this online, it would have been the most hilarious video. Okay, and then all of a sudden I started acting like I watched it. I started acting like a roadman. Because there's a guy, some buildings away with a dog, and he was looking at me in a bad way, and I remembered it. I said, "That man over there!" I said, "That dog's getting it!" I can't remember what I was saying, and then after that, no word of a lie. We've got a corridor, and then there's like the elevator. I didn't know where I was. I could not remember that. And then I stopped remembering who I was. Wallahi, I didn't know who I was. I don't know who this guy is, Millions of people knew who he is across the world, but I didn't know myself. And then I started saying, using philosophical jargon, I said, I don't know who I am. Who am I? Yeah? But I know there's a necessary existence. I know that there's Allah. I know this. So that's the closest I've ever come to an ego death, through manipulation, through medical manipulation, like hallucination, where you forget who you are. I mean, some people take it to induce this very disgusting feeling. I would not recommend it. Oh, it's horrible. Wallahi, I felt sick, from this. Don't get yourself involved in it. But what I'm trying to say is a complete ego death, where you killed it, because they call it, in some spiritual circles, they call this ego death. I don't think it's possible. I think it's unrealistic expectation. So the right question is not whether this is selfish or not. The right question is, do I have ihtisab or not? And what's the higher level ihtisab? Ihtisab is when you start thinking, I'm going to do this for the sake of Allah. The highest level one is to connect to the specific sifa. So for example, if I'm doing something which Allah has created human beings with certain attributes which are similar to His in some aspects. It's called al-qadr al-mushtarak. Yeah, because otherwise we would never know who He is. We would never know who He is if we couldn't see. We would never know Allah could see if we didn't have this experience of seeing. If there was no experience of seeing, like the Mu'tazilas and these guys say, if we didn't have any experience, we wouldn't understand what it means for there to be a seeing God. If we had no experience of hearing, we would not understand what it means to be a hearing God. If there was no experience of loving, we would not understand what it is to be a loving God. So Allah, He put something in us, which is, there is some qadr mushtarak. There is some level of continuity between Allah's sifa and you. Yes, there is. If there wasn't at all, then you might as well be an atheist, frankly, because you would never know Allah, who He is. Yeah? So you start to think about what is it that sifa, for example, you're loving someone, if you're giving, then you think of Allah's karam. You connect that, your sifa with Allah's sifa. That's the highest level of living as a human being. Because everything you're doing, you're connecting it to the ma'rifah of Allah, of who Allah is, and connects it to your purpose in conjunction with that greater being that created you. There's nothing higher that you can do in this world.
So is it fair to conclude, just to simplify that, to say, if the selfishness aligns with what Allah wants for me, that's a good selfishness?
And that's exactly what the Prophet ﷺ says. He said, لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى يكون هواه تبعا لما جئت به. That no, one of you is not going to believe, surely one of you is not going to believe until his hawa, his desires are in line with what I have come with.
So if the selfishness does not align with that, then that's bad selfishness.
Yes.
If the selfishness aligns with what Allah wants for us, then that's the good selfishness.
That's a bit of an issue with terminology.
Yeah.
Because an act of a mother protecting her child, we wouldn't actually say that that's selfish. Selfless. So we don't even use the word selfish in that sense.
Yeah.
So a person acting upon the love of Allah, acting, worshiping Allah, out of love of Allah, we don't reflect that much on the aspect that, okay,
that's selfish,
we're
yeah.
getting out of something, so we should call it selfish.
Yeah.
Actually, that's not the case.
It's true. I mean, this is a good point, Sheikh. The istilah issue of, would we call this selfish? We wouldn't. In vernacular language, we would not call this selfish. But the psychologists, these guys will push it and say, yeah.
Anything that gains out of something,
Yeah.
yourself,
Yeah.
calling it selfish, actually it's not.
It's not, yeah. We don't use the language like that. It's true.
Because it's like negative language. and we need to use something a bit more befitting with the deen. But that's like purely being extremely like academic and psychological and using that terminology about it.
Yeah.
Which shows you the problem with Western education and the way that they promote their stuff.
Yeah.
طيب,
Thank you so much. Let's have a rest, guys. Let's enjoy ourselves.
Now there's a free session, and then after 1 hour we'll come back. There is more team building activities that are going to take place in the main hall, inshallah, with Brother Umar and Brother Yunus. Are you guys ready? Yunus, are you guys ready? Where's Umar? خلاص. There's tea making facilities and cakes and biscuits and that. Okay, so for that.